Hello, this is a screen tutorial on how to use running records to inform our teaching. Running records are the invention of Marie Clay, and she published this particular assessment tool, among others, in a book called An Observation Survey of Early Literacy Achievement. We can see the teacher on the right is taking a running record while the child that she's working with is pointing to the text and reading. And Marie Clay gives us a way to record what students are saying while they read. And then we will also be able to score that running record to determine if the text was at a good level for the student. And we will be able to analyze that running record to see what strategies and cueing systems the child is attending to and which cueing systems and strategies the child needs to work on. So the idea here is that running records, which you already know how to take the conventions for, will help us improve our teaching if we learn how to score and analyze them effectively. So this is what running records look like. They're not always terribly neat and tidy, but they do record reading behavior so that we can analyze it. This is the form that is provided in the observation survey. So just to give you a little bit of a rundown of what's recorded on the form, you have the student's name and the date, and then we can determine if the text is easy. This student read the text at 97% accuracy, so it's definitely in the easy range, and they could correct 1 out of every 2 errors that they made. You'll see that in the body of the running record, you have a big section here to record what the student is doing when they're reading. That's all our little check marks and error marks. And we have a column for page numbers so we can keep track of when those things happened. And then these columns over here are for analysis. And we record those columns after the record. So what we're going to do first is, first we'll look at what we're going to analyze. Okay, so after we take a running record, we will be able to score that record. That means we can calculate if the book is hard, which would be below 90% accuracy, instructional level, which would be between 90 and 94% accuracy, or independent or easy, which means the child can read that text at 95% accuracy. Now, it's important to note that if you're sending on home homework for a child, you want them to read a text and answer questions. You want to make sure that they can read that text at 95% accuracy, or else they will not be able to independently decode and use that information. We're also going to be able to tell the self-correction rate. The self-correction rate is very important. We all make miscues when we read. It's important to be able to fix them up, to notice them, and then fix them up. So we record that as a ratio. 1 to 2 means the child can fix up 1 out of every 2 errors that they make. 1 to 5 means the child can fix up 1 out of every 5 errors that they make. If the child corrects no words in a running record, that indicates that they are either not monitoring or keeping track of whether what they're saying is correct, or they don't know how to fix those up. We want a nice low self-correction rate, like 1 in 2 is what we're going for. The child can fix up half of all the words that they miscue. All right, so in your handouts that accompany this screencast, you have a copy of the observation surveys running record form. And we're just going to practice taking the running record in this form so that we can then do some analysis over here. You'll be putting the page number as we come to it. Don't put that in ahead of time. You'll take the running record in this section here. Remember, you want the running record to follow the conventions of the layout of the text. And then in between pages, you'll just draw a line in between your record. We are going to be taking a running record on the monster sandwich. So as soon as you have your materials together, you can proceed with the video.
Okay, we're going to do a reading of A Monster Sandwich by Joy Cowley. And I will be doing a dramatic reenactment of how Jonathan read this book. Sorry. Page 2. Put some lettuce in it. Put some yellow cheese in it. some green pickles in it. Put some red meat in it. Put some salt. Ooh, I mean tomatoes in it. Put some bread in it. Wait, that's not right. Oh, now I remember. Put some bread on it. Put, oh, take. Now take a bite. Yummy, yummy. And that is how Jonathan read A Monster Sandwich by Joy Cowley.
Okay, so that's the monster sandwich. And you could take a look at your running record to see how it compares to mine. On most pages, Jonathan was adding some words, and we could tell that he wasn't really paying attention to one-to-one match on some of those pages because he kind of stopped pointing at different pages. So he was telling us about yellow cheese and green pickles and red meat. And then when he got to the page with the salt and the tomato, or with the tomatoes, it also had a picture of salt and pepper in the background. So he got a little tricked using the picture there. And then the pattern changed at the end, and that was a little tricky for this guy. So just take a look at your running record, compare it to mine, and the hardest part I think here is recording some of the self corrections. And you know how to make a self correction is just to put a check mark here. Reading recovery teachers, we use this SC convention to indicate self correction, but you can just put a check mark there for correct reading. It's the same thing. Okay, when you're finished looking at this running record, we'll move on to the next piece of this, which is scoring and analyzing this record. So the first thing you should know, you have a handout that describes specifically what counts as errors and what does not count as errors. So think about it this way. We're going to count anything as an error if when the child finishes reading, it is not the actual word in the text. So if they substitute one word for another, like they say worry for wonder, that's going to be one error. If children insert a word, it'll be an error for every word that they add to the text. If the child omits a word, we're going to give one error for any word that is omitted. And if we end up having to tell the student a word, we will have to count that as an error. So that's one of the reasons we try not to tell. We tell them as much as we can, you try it. Things that you want to remember don't count as errors because they're actually just good reading behavior are things like repeating. When a child repeats a word or repeats a phrase, they are really probably monitoring that text. That's the reason they're rereading, because something isn't sounding quite right. So that is not in itself an error. The other thing you want to think about is when a child is saying part of the sounds, we call that partial articulation. We don't call it sounding out. So if the child says ta, temper, all right, if they get to say the actual word, so if they actually would say o, n, l, e, only, right? They got to the word, and that sounding behavior or that partial articulation led them there. So we're not going to count this partial articulation as error behavior. Now you know that the child is saying the sounds of these words because the sounds of these letters because they're in lowercase form with dashes after them, which means they're saying t, per. See how that works? Now, on this example, the second example here, temper is counted as an error, not because the student was subarticulating, but because when they finish the word, it's still not the word in the text. So subarticulation on its own, just saying parts of the sounds in the words, is not an error unless the child leaves the attempt without actually getting to the word. So it's not an error to try. All right, so you can read through this form and you can refer to this form as you count the errors. So we're going to go back to Monster Sandwich, and you actually have a copy of this version of Monster Sandwich. So it may, depending on how accurate your running record was, I really do think it's probably easier now for you to just switch to my version of Monster Sandwich and start practicing scoring and analyzing using this form. So we're all talking about the same record. If your running record wasn't terribly accurate, I would really highly encourage you to look on Blackboard for the tab that says Extra Running Record Practice. There are some videos there that you can use to practice taking some running records and prompting after the running record. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look for errors. And when we find an error, we're going to go across the line. And if we find an error, we're going to put a hash mark in this column. E stands for error, self-correction, SC. So right now we're just looking at these two columns. And note, you're going to count either errors or self-corrections. So when you find an error, so I'm going to cross here, I find no errors there. Oh, I find one here. So I'm going to put a hash mark right here, just one hash mark. If the child had fixed up this error, I would count it as the self-correction. So everything is going to count as either an error or a self-correction, but not both. Okay? So pause the video and you work your way through these errors, counting them as either errors or self-corrections. Let's see what we come up with. A note to self. You are only ever marking hash marks here, and you are marking them down the line as you go across the text. So for example, on this page, I see one error here, so I would put a hash mark right here. And then I see another error here, and I would put a hash mark down here. We don't put a 2 here because we need to analyze each error individually. And we will know that as we're going across the text, we are marking the errors down the column. All right, pause the video now. And then after you've marked the errors or self-corrections, proceed with the video to see how yours compares to mine. Okay, so we're back. I hope you really did this on your own. That's the only way to get good at this. All right, so we are looking at the first page. No errors in the very top line. Second line has in for on. Oops. Second line has in for on. So well, that's not going to work. So I am going to, sorry guys, things fall apart. Move this over here. Ugh. Good modeling of, things just don't always work out perfectly. So there they go. Okay, so here we are. And for the first line, everything's just fine. The second line, we have one error in for on. The third line, I have one error for the insertion of yellow, and then one error for in for on. And then again, green and in for on. So that's what my tally mark looks like so far. Okay? Second page, I've got one for the red, in for on. Now here we have salt for tomatoes. That's an error. So the child made an error right there. But then we see toe, this nice partial articulation, and then they get it. So they made a mistake. They made an error that they fixed up. So that is going to count as, you got it, a self-correction. Then we have in for on. The first line here, no errors. The second line here, they made an error, but they fixed it up. So that is going to count as a self-correction. Now here we have put for now, but then they corrected it. So that one counts as a self-correction right there. And then the child went tay, and then they said take. Is this part an error, or is it just partial articulation? It's just partial articulation, and then they said the word. So this does not count as an error. Something cannot count as an error unless it is first, something cannot count as a self-correction unless it is first an error. This is not an error, and they just were reading carefully. This, on the other hand, is an error to say salt for tomatoes. And then they looked through the word and made a self-correction. So because it was first an error and they fixed it, that counts as self-correction. All right, and then error, error, yummy, yummy. Now, this will then give us the information we need to calculate the percentage accuracy. You have this form, which is another page out of the observation survey, which will tell us how to score this text. Now, the first thing we can do is we need to count the number of running words. In the text that we just worked with, Monster Sandwich, there are 36 running words. And then we are going to count the number of errors. The errors are 10. And we're going to count the number of self-corrections. I had the self-corrections as 3. And so the first way we can calculate percentage accuracy is to go after it as an error rate. This is a nice and quick way of doing the calculation. So I'm using this calculation right here, which says that the error rate is errors over running words. Taking this right out of the clay text here. And so I'm taking the errors are 10 over running words are 36. I'm going to reduce that by taking the top number and saying 10 goes into 10 once. 10 goes into 36 about 3.6 times. And so the error rate is, I'm going to round that up to 4. The error rate is about 1 to 4. And when I go in here to this chart, now you take this error rate right here in the chart, 1 to 4 is about 75% accuracy. So the error rate will give you an estimate of the percentage accuracy, and you can do that pretty quickly. If you wanted to calculate the precise percentage accuracy, here's the formula for percentage accuracy. You're going to take 100, and then you're going to subtract errors over running words times 100. So I've got my error rate equals 100 minus 10 errors over 36 words times 100. So again, 100, 10 times 100 is 1,000. 36 times 1 is 36. When you divide 36 into 1,000, you get 27.77777. I'm going to round that up to 28. 100 minus 28 is 72%. So you can see the error rate was an approximation. It's pretty close to the actual error rate. I'm sorry, the actual percentage accuracy. So this would make this text kind of hard for this kiddo. The next thing we're going to look at is the self-correction rate. And the formula for self-correction rate is right here. It's self-corrections over errors plus self-corrections. The self-corrections were 3. The errors were 10. So we've got 10 plus the 3 self-corrections there. Makes it 3 over 13. And I'm going to reduce that by saying 3 goes into 3 once. And 3 goes into 13 about 4 times. 4 times 3 would be 12, and I'm really close to 13. So the self-correction rate is just about 1 to 4. Now, we could say this text is hard for Jonathan. But the other thing we would look at is the nature of his miscues. When Jonathan was making mistakes, he was adding words, and he was changing this little function word. So even though he added things, he added meaningful little pieces to the text. And it didn't probably sound terribly nonsensical as he was reading it. So you kind of balance the student's understanding of the text with that percentage accuracy. I'm going to guess that even though the percentage accuracy was very low on this, that Jonathan most probably wasn't in great pain while he was reading this, and he can learn from this experience. Let's practice this again. I mean, I'm not the math person, so this is dangerous, but I'm going to say, let's practice this again. And what I want you to do is pretend that the child on this same book, 36 Running Words, had 1 self-correction and 3 errors. So same book. Use these numbers to calculate the error rate that you can then convert into a percentage accuracy here. Also try to get the accuracy rate. So again, use this formula. It's right here, using these numbers. And also try the self-correction ratio. Pause the video until you've calculated those 3 things, and then resume the video so you can see how your work compares to mine. Really try this, because you'll be responsible for doing it in your work as a teacher. You'll probably have to be able to do it on the Reading Foundation's 090 test, and you will definitely do it on your written final exam. All right, so this is my error rate calculation. 92 or 1 to 12 came out here at 1 to 12, something like 92%. So that's why it's kind of the not quite equal sign. The accuracy rate, when I calculated it out, I got to 92%. So that's a really nice comparison. And the self-correction rate was 1 out of 4 errors made. You could fix up 1 out of 4. Okay. So if this is something that is complex or causing you problems, that is something to email me about so that we can incorporate that into our next class's practice. That was scoring the running record, calculating the percentage accuracy and the self-correction rate. Now we're moving into analyzing the running record. Analyzing the running record means looking at the errors the student makes to see which cueing systems this child is using and which strategies the child is using. So we're going to look to see if the child is using meaning, which is semantic cues, background knowledge, the context of the story, and picture cues. Structure is the way it sounds like English or grammar, the patterns in the text. And visual cues are the graphophonemic cues, the letter and sound correspondences. Very important to note that picture cues are in the meaning category. Visual is only related to graphophonemic letter sound patterns. Now, on your form, there are columns. This column here is for the errors. When we see an error, we are going to write the letters M for meaning, S for syntax or structure, grammar, and V for visual, which you will remember is only the graphophonemic cues. And what you're going to do is when you see an error, right here's the error, we have it listed. So we're going to write MSV, and then we're going to circle the cueing systems that we see the student using. So on this first one, the child reads, oh, what is it? Put some lettuce in it. Okay, when the child says put some lettuce in, that sounds like English. That's syntactically okay. It makes sense. And visually, look at that. Visually, it's half right, right? So you have to kind of think, what do I think they're using the most? I really think that probably when I gave them the pattern, I might have said, put some lettuce in it, put some cheese in it, put something in it. And it is a pattern. So I'm going to give it the structure here. When the child reads, put some yellow cheese in it, why did they add yellow? Well, it made sense with the picture, didn't it? So M is meaning, which means also the picture. And again, now this is getting to be a really big pattern. And we said that pattern is syntax or structure. Put some green pickles in it. Oh, it just made sense. And then in for on, now that's the pattern of the book. He's really got this pattern as a momentum mark. What I'd like you to do is go on to page 5 to the end of the book. Pause the video here while you calculate and analyze the MSNV for errors. If you find a self-correction, so if you have something on the next page that's marked for a self-correction, you will analyze it as the error. So you'll say, what cueing system was the child paying attention to when they made the error? And then you will also write MS and V over here for asking yourself, what new information did the child look at to fix that word up? So we only count things as either errors or self-corrections when we're counting the errors, but we analyze self-corrections at the error point as well as the self-correction point. Pause the video now, do your analysis on the rest of the book, and then restart the video to compare. All right, so the child's reading along. Red tomatoes, it's right there in the picture. In for on is the pattern. Then the child says, put some salt. Well, on that page, there is a picture of salt. There sure is. So the picture was what the child was attending to when they made this error. But then they started working toe. Now, the only way you're going to say toe on that page is because you're looking at these letters. So they are now using the visual cues. This is a great example of some cross-checking happening there. The child checked the picture and then they checked that first letter. In for on again is structure, and then no errors in the beginning. When the child made this error in for on, I think it's the pattern of the text in for on every page. And then the child said, no, that's not right. On that page, the child is saying, put some bread in it. You know, you can't actually say we put bread in a sandwich. It just doesn't work that way. So here, the meaning is going to be off. And so I had accidentally circled structure here. I think they're really thinking about the meaning of the story there. You can't say put bread in a sandwich. Then we've got put for now. Well, I think that the reason the child is saying put here is that on every page before this, the pattern was put some, put some. So they got here and said puts. So put was something that they remembered. I'm not sure what they were looking at when they fixed it up, so I put a question mark. And then we've got yummy, yummy. You know, yummy sounds right. It makes sense with the story, and it's visually very similar to the word. So I'd just say those are all three. It's pretty good error. All right, so that is how we are analyzing the running record. Now we're using these notations to help us now say something about that student. So which strategies is this student showing us that they use well? Which strategies are they consistently using across this text? Are they using high frequency known sight words? Are they using one-to-one match consistently? Do they seem to check pictures? Do they seem to use the pattern in the text? Are they paying attention to the first letter in words consistently? Do we see evidence, some good evidence of cross-checking? So stop the video, think a bit about which of these you would say this student is doing. Okay, he has a little problem with one-to-one match. And there are certainly some high frequency words that he's not quite using. I do think he's looking at the picture. Sometimes it gets him off track, but other times it's probably helpful. So he is checking the picture. And he's using a pattern. Unfortunately, it's not the pattern of the text, right? I see one place where he's really getting his mouth ready for that word right there. He really got his mouth ready for that word. And here too. but I don't see consistent evidence of cross-checking. So I think the best thing that he's doing here is checking the picture. Really, that's the most consistent thing he's doing. And then using the pattern. When we're looking at this student, what do we think this student does when they come to a tricky part? So when this student comes to a tricky part, what do we want them to do? What are some strategies this child needs to work on? Pause the video, think about it, and then restart. So one of the things I see this child needs to work on is definitely one-to-one match. On several pages, he's inserting words. And so I would say, you know what, on page 5, there's a place where I could talk about that. He makes the error, and I could go back to that error, and I could help him think about how to do one-to-one match. So think about the prompts that you know that you can use to help kids think about one-to-one match. What would you say? So I might say something like, you said, and I would point to the words in the book. You said, put some red tomatoes in it. Does that match? So if it says, put some tomatoes on it, every time you see a word, you say a word, you point below the words and I'll point on top, and let's make it match. So that's the kind of thing that we're going to use running records for, to look at what the error behavior shows us the child needs to do, and then we can prompt. That's not the only thing this child needs to work on. Another thing you could have talked about is using known words. On every page, we've got in for on. And so if we wanted to get this child to think about using some known words, and in and on are known words, we could start on page 2. And what do we usually say to kids when we want them to start thinking about known words and using them? Oops, that's not what we say. We say, show me on or show me in, and make the child look for that anchor in the text. But that's also not the only thing Jonathan needs to work on. He really does need to work on this idea of using the first letter to help him predict the text, getting his mouth ready. I think to help him with that, I might go to this page 6, because it's a place where we see him actually doing it. And I could say, you said, put some salt. I would be pointing to the pages in the book. You said, put some salt. And then you noticed something. What did you notice? And I would say that, pointing to that first letter. So this is a way to bring the child's attention to the things that they need to learn. You will be doing a similar process to this, practicing using a running record to inform your teaching. And you're going to do that on your weekly prep this week. So on your weekly prep, you will be watching a reading of Faces. The story is Faces, and you have a copy of the pages of that text in your handouts for this screencast. You'll watch the video of a child reading Faces, and then you will answer the same kind of questions that we just did with Monster Sandwich. You'll calculate the percentage accuracy using the clay table there that we've used up here. So you'll use this handout that you have to calculate the percentage accuracy and the self-correction rate. And you will also think about, well, what strategies does this student seem to use well? And when they come to a tricky part, what's something they need to learn to do? And if you were going to teach them that, what might you say? So we're trying to put all of these pieces together. Certainly the first time you do it is a little difficult. I understand that this is a challenging task, but it will be something that we continue to practice. So give it your best shot. Once you have the weekly prep printed off, you can restart this video and just take the running record right here on this blank piece of paper. And then you're going to make your own columns for M, S, and V. so that you can have little columns that look like this. Errors, self-corrections, MSV for errors and MSV for self-corrections. You're going to make a little column just like this. So go ahead and get that blank piece of paper from your weekly prep. Set up your columns, and then progress this video, and you can listen to the book read and take the running record.
All right, we are going to read the book Faces. I will read it and you will take the running record. This is a book by Jillian Cutting. This is a clown. This is a zombie. This is a snake. This is a monkey. This is a dog. This is a mouse. This is oh, wait up. That's not a. Me. This is me. That is the book Faces. All right, we are going.
Okay, so you can use your picture handout of the pages of the book, and you will be answering these questions on your weekly prep. Look forward to seeing what you thought about that running record.